Good afternoon, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Njabulon Ngube. I'll be presenting on the impact of diabetes mellitus 2, better known as diabetes type 2. And on this, I'm going to present preliminary results of our full case analysis. Okay, this is a disclaimer clause showing that the views I'm going to say here are my own, not of IFO, in as much also they are going to own my presentation and also give to others. Okay, my presentation is going to follow the following outline. I'll just give you the introduction where I will tell you the purpose of the study and why we chose diabetes type 2. And also we go on to the study design, and then I'll give you the results and further work of our research. The purpose of our study is to derive, analyze, and model the impact of diabetes mellitus 2 on longevity and morbidity risk, and the primary outcome of this research is all-cause mortality, and also if time permits, we are also going to look at secondary outcomes, which are mainly complications of diabetes 2, to look at the morbidity risk within the different groups, those who have got diabetes 2 and those who don't have diabetes 2. Why we chose diabetes is premised on the previous statistics, and mainly we looked at also one that produced by the World Health Organization. We can see that in 2016, diabetes was ranked number 7 in all causes of mortality globally. But you can see from 2000, for all ages, diabetes was not among the top 10 causes of mortality. But as we come up to 2016, you can see that it's also getting into the top 10 of cause mortality. And you can see the first 3 diseases that rank number 1, number 2, number 3, they are also linked to diabetes as the complications of diabetes. And coming to UK, from the data that we got from the Office of National Statistics, 2017, you can see that the causes of death related to diabetes mellitus has got an exponential increase from 2011 up to 2016. So it's a cause of concern for us to see in terms of the impact of diabetes on mortality. Right, our study design, as you have seen here also from the previous presenters, we using the UK thin database, and for our diabetes type 2 study, we selected all patients diagnosed with diabetes between 1984 and up to 2017, and also were aged 40 years and above at the time of diagnosis, and these we matched them. One case, the cases are diabetes, and if you hear me say cases, they are diabetes patients, and those who are controls are non-diabetic patients. So we match them 1 case to 3 controls by practice, age, and sex. And we excluded our patients who had life-limiting conditions at the entry time. Then our follow-up period is up to 2017, as I've alluded earlier on the first bulletin. Right, for the study, we looked at the variables of interest premised on other previous studies and also medical literature. For demographic, we included those variables which are the age group, birth year, probably some saying birth cohort, gender, and also the general practice. I just grouped it there as a demographic variable because it's kind of like a classic group of people. And then looked at the lifestyle and socioeconomic variables. We included smoking status, the socioeconomic status, the Townsend deprivation index, and also the body mass index. And we also included several medical conditions at the time of entry. Also on the model, we also had some interactions, for example, the age group and gender, case control, and smoking status. These premised on the statistics that we had, the descriptive statistics that we came up to come up with the interactions. As I said earlier on, that I'm just going to look at the full case subset of our study. For us to come up with the full case analysis, we had to select a few variables to use as the selecting criteria. All the patients we had information on smoking status, alcohol consumption, Townsend, BMI, and also blood pressure, blood lipid ratio, and high density lipoproteins. Those patients with the information, complete information on these variables are qualified to become part of our full case or complete case analysis. These are the charts that are giving you, in general, the data set that we have. The total data set constituted of 108,282 cases, of whom 57% are males. And then for controls, we had 253,855% being males. For the full case analysis, we had 20,213 cases, of whom 57.7% are males, 28,693 controls, of whom 56.2% were males. And as you can see from the bar charts, you can see that we have the gold color is for the cases, and the navy blue color is for the controls. You can see from this bar plot that mainly most males, they get diagnosed with diabetes type 2 between the ages of 55 to 64 years. And also for females, we see that between the ages of 60 to 64 years. This bar chart shows that in as much we excluded patients with severe condition, we still have got some, we have got less severe conditions, so that they can be generalized to the UK population, so that our models can also meet, or probably the mortality or the risk that we get from the model can also be generalized to the UK population. Right. With all the variables that I've mentioned earlier on, we had to, after running our Cox regression, we had to select the variables which were significant for the model. So we used the backward elimination. And for the main effects, we used the significance level of 5%. And for the interaction, we used 1%. The reason why they differ, we just wanted for the interaction to just get the interactions that add more to the model. Because with a larger data set, everything becomes significant. And we ended up with these variables in our models, including interactions between them. We tested for the assumptions. I think I didn't want to bore you with the same presentations which have been presented earlier on in terms of the Schoenfeld residuals and stuff like that. So I'm just presenting the Grams and Turner test. We can see from the result that we have 3 variables which we're violating the pH assumption, the proportional hazard assumption, which are the birth cohort, hypercholesterolemia, and hypertension. We then use the time Cox to try and also see if we can get the same results, because it allows for time-dependent analysis of these variables. But having the information that we have previously, we had to feed in and to inform the function that you have in time Cox, which variables would want to analyze as time-dependent and which are time-invariant. So after we ran using the time Cox and using the 5% as the significance level, we found out that hypercholesterolemia only remains as the variable that, that violates the pH assumption. We then decided to use a parametric regression model for our model. So the first thing was to find the distribution that fits our empirical cumulative hazard. So we looked at the distribution and we found that it was the Gompets did fit much our model, our cumulative hazard. And with this information, we used the Gompets Cox regression, or probably the one that is mentioned, double Cox regression by Elena earlier on. Which takes into account the shape model and the scale model, of which the shape model, that's the one that probably tells you in terms of the change in time, the variant in time. For the shape model, we use the hypercholesterolemia because we found that is the only one that is violating the pH assumption. And then for the scale model, we added everything and the interactions in the model. And this is what we got. You can see from the first plot that being diagnosed with diabetes, it gives someone a 35.7% increase risk of all-cause mortality, and is very significant. And also at the age groups, those aged 50 to 59 and 60 plus, can see that age on its own, sometimes it's known that age on its own, it's an independent predictor. And they're also significant. But however, we can see in as much as there are some which you've got a higher hazard, like the BMI, both of them, 15% increase and 19% increase for overweight and obese, respectively, but they are not that much significant. Then we plotted the log of the hazards, complete hazards, and then we find that with selected information for variables for explanatory for this presentation, I looked for only for the males. We have got treated hypercholesteremia. Why? Because I just took the hypercholesteremia because it's the one that is violating the pH assumption, and then I just looked at the males and then compared the males or cases who are being treated, and also can look at the controls males who are being treated. You can see that for the males, that's the blue line. We have got treated hypercholesteremia for the controls, and the green line for the controls. The blue line is for the cases. You can see that there's kind of like a parallel lines, and for the controls, they've got a higher hazard than the controls. That's the similar situation that we get for untreated hypercholesteremia for the males, the cases, which is the red line, and for the controls, which is the gold line. So in simpler terms, what you can see here is that because of the differences in hypercholesteremia in terms of the changes in time, and you can see that there's the hazard rates, they differ also with time for those groups. Thank you. Okay, right, for our future work, we are going to have, after having finished working with the full case, we are going to do an imputation of the data, and then we'll translate that into actuarial model, and that's the same thing we can also do with the morbidity models. Maybe we're going to look at the cancer, and then we translate it into actuarial models, and by the end of the research, we'll expect to publish 2 papers.
Okay.
Thank you much for it.
Thank you very much, Shabula. Questions, please. Yes, please.
Just wind back to that final graph, please. Do you have any concerns in this about the crossover? So we've got blue v red there, which I think is those cases, so those with type 2 diabetes, with and without a treatment. And it's sort of suggesting that the value of the treatment decays with time. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you've found in your various tests. But does this cause concern that the lines cross over, almost suggesting that the functional form of the introduction of the time variable is maybe not good enough or has some limitations?
Yeah, generally, as you can see, it's definitely should cause a cause of concern with respect to the medication, but we have not probably, in terms of exhausted, in terms of these results, to look at the limitations as per se, as you are saying.
Maybe I can say something here. Basically, this is exactly this illustration of different shapes of the hazards for this double Cox model. In this case, we have Gompertz baseline distributions. That's why we just have straight lines at the log hazard scale. So we are just showing different slopes, which depend on whether they have treated hypercholestemia. And actually, what we don't have here, and this is, by the way, a picture, we don't have people with no hypercholestemia.
Yes, because it was used as the baseline, as the reference point.
Yeah.
So
We should have put that line on the slide, but we haven't. So basically, different slopes of this line is exactly a result of our second regression for the shape parameter of the baseline hazard. Because in this case, we have only one covariate which affects shape, and this is hypercholestemia. Now, comparing the red line to the blue line, yes, you are right that the hazards of untreated hypercholestemia seems to be high, to start with, higher than for treated, and then they cross. Why that happens, of course, is not clear, but what I wanted to mention here is that this is a comparatively simple design where we only look at the baseline. So we have no idea whether people who had untreated hypercholestemia at the baseline picked up statins at some point later. So I wouldn't kind of...
Or diabetes, do you mean?
They do have diabetes, yes. But when they are diagnosed with diabetes, we put in 1 or 0 depending on whether they have statins. This is what it means, those two lines. But they may have changed their prescription to statins in the course of the treatment. We don't know, once more. So basically, I don't know why those lines cross, apart from we do see different shapes of the hazards.
Well, following that up, I mean, where does the main body of the data lie in this? I mean, are most of your observations up to 7 years, and then you don't have many?
Oh, can we have the numbers of the observations? Do you have it somewhere for follow-up?
for follow-up, not on this slide. Not on this slide, we don't have.
It doesn't say really, so we don't know. What is your average follow-up? And did you look at it?
Sorry, come again?
We are asking about number of patients over time.
Mm-hmm.
How many are still there as time goes by?
I can't give it number offhand, but what I know is as time goes by, for the full case data, if you had to look at the Kaplan-Meier plots, it goes up to 30 years. But for the full case, it goes up to 15. But as time goes on, like we've got very few kind of subjects that remains in the study.
But you don't really know kind of how many patients you have after, say, 7 years.
No, I can't say general how many after 7 years, because I wasn't prepared for the question.
I'm just thinking that the crossover might be more of a slight artificial extrapolation, where you've maybe got some data, but not very much.
Yeah, I think that at 7 years we probably still have enough cases, yeah. Maybe not at 15, but yeah.
So it might just be that you've got a good fit at for the Gompertz for those first few years, but then it's maybe not so good in the later years.
I think what we are really missing here is 2 more lines, which are the baseline lines for the people who don't have any hypercholestemia, because we need to compare to those. It may well be, for instance, that treated hypercholestemia corresponds to people who are really have it really bad, kind of, yeah. So, I don't know. Yes, please, yeah.
So I understand that the mortality, well, for the type 2 diabetes, the severity varies and the prescription given by the GP might vary also. For example, some very light cases might be asked to control via lifestyle, and others might be prescribed with oral tablets, whereas the most severe cases would be prescribed with insulin. So I wonder whether these different controls will affect the mortality of those case groups such that it's not a homogeneous group, and whether you have considered allowing for that under the variable of interest. And similarly for the control group, which is the non-diabetes cases, they will be formed with people who are not at risk of diabetes at all, plus those people who are already in the pre-diabetes stage. So I wonder whether you have considered that and whether that has caused some effect of this crossing over showing in this graph.
With respect to medication of diabetes, when we looked at our data, most of these patients who are diabetic was, in terms of management, they get the first line drug, which is called metformin, and most of them, they have got they were prescribed with metformin. So trying to compare them with probably some who are taking sulfonylurea or probably TZD, because these are kind of like, which are given at a later stage. So because already metformin has got its own effects in the earlier stages of after being diagnosed.
I probably would like to clarify that, yes, we are starting this follow-up of patients exactly when they are diagnosed. So at that stage, usually, yes, they would be in early stages of diabetes, and they would get some first-line prescription like metformin. And of course, over the course of years, their prescription will become more and more involved, including insulin, for instance. But to do that, we need a different analysis. We need something like landmark analysis to have change in prescriptions over time in it. We don't have it in this analysis because this is only looks at prescription at the baseline. Okay. And you're right that controls also may develop diabetes sometime later. We don't know once more. Okay.
Can I just check my understanding of the y-axis here? So this is the log of the shape parameter.
Basically, if you remember this Gompertz line, it is A plus BT. So it's a value of B, which is the slope.
Oh, so it's not the shape parameter?
It is a shape parameter for Gompertz, yes.
So would that mean where they cross over, would that mean that that's the point at which one becomes more skewed than the other?
It's a point where one of the hazards becomes,
more
stronger.
skewed. So it's really just the skewness changes, not the absolute value necessarily.
Is the y-axis the log of the hazard?
It's log of the hazards, yes.
Oh, so it is the log of the hazards, not the log of the shape.
It is not the log of the shape, it's the log of the hazard.
It's the log of the hazards, okay.
But on the log scale, the log hazard of Gompertz distribution is a straight line, and shape translates to the slope of that line.
Okay. I had a question about slide 17. So the analysis, 1.7, that's it. The analysis was done on data between 1986 and what was the upper limit of?
1st of January 2017.
2017. So the hazard, the relative risk for diabetes will have changed considerably over that period of time.
Okay, for these, the hazard doesn't change. It's for the covariates that we have here. The effects, they don't change over time for the case control. As I have shown, it's only for hypercholesterolemia that has got an effect that changes. So we are just showing that if being diagnosed with diabetes over that time, it doesn't change. You've got.
So is this saying that aggregated between 1986 and 2017, the hazard ratio for being diabetic was 1.45 or so?
You should take into account that we also adjust for quite a few other factors, and those include major morbidities, and they also include birth cohort. Do you have birth cohorts there? I think we have several birth cohorts. So those effects would adjust for kind of medical advances.
Because the mortality improvement in diabetics over that time was very, very much higher than in the rest of the population. I was wondering whether your modelling corrected for that.
I think that taking into account birth cohort should account for that. How many birth cohorts do we have, Jabula?
We have got 3. 3 groups of birth cohorts.
Okay, in this analysis we have 3 different birth cohorts depending on when they were born. And we also have age and diagnosis as well.
Possibly related to that point, can I ask why you didn't match by birth control and birth cohort in your selection of your controls? You say you match by age and smoking status and a few other things, but birth cohort is specifically not amongst them. And so I was wondering why you made that choice.
Okay, when you match by birth, by age, definitely we are saying those who are aged, if I'm aged 60 years, which I'm not yet, I would look for someone who's also aged 60 years. So we are looking at the same group of people born in the same year. So in some way, we have also taken into consideration the birth cohort. I don't know if I'm...
Sorry, so if you're 60, but you could be 60 in 1990 in that study, or 60 in 2015.
Yeah, sorry, when we choose controls, we are choosing people of the same age at the same time, in the same general practice, and the same gender.
So there's an implicit control by calendar year as well. That
so
just
we
isn't
will
mentioned.
control also by choice of controls, yes.
Okay, thank you.
How about the impact of diet and lifestyle?
Unfortunately, the question was about diet and lifestyle, and unfortunately we don't have the data on the diet and things, so we cannot say.
Because medical practitioners, they do say if you are on a good diet and then you do physical exercise and all those things, it may have an impact. So that will explain the reason why the graphical has made that demonstration.
Yes, absolutely. Partly it would be picked up through deprivation, though, because the diet and lifestyle will depend on the deprivation. But unfortunately, we don't have direct data on the diet and exercise in the thing.
And also, where we have a wife or a partner supporting themselves, this is likely to have an impact on the longevity, that is diabetics. That is where, for example, a wife is supporting her husband, there will be a difference between there will be a different mortality or longevity factor than when a diabetic person lives alone.
You're right that it would be interesting also to look at the separate frailty, say, to do with families and that kind of thing, but we haven't.
Yeah, also with respect, there is some variables which are to identify those who are living alone, how many they are probably, and those who are living with other people. But unfortunately, there's a lot of missing data, which is probably, when you do imputation, it might not be probably good for us to use such kind to impute on that variable.
Okay, I think that, okay, last question, and then we will need. So I see there is a lot of interest to diabetes.
Sorry, I was just going to ask how you identified diabetics. Was it by diagnostic reader code, or was it by HbA1c or fasting blood sugar? How did you categorize them as being diabetic or non-diabetic? And the reason I ask is that in 1999, diagnostic threshold, the WHO criteria changed, so that post-1999, there are a lot of people who were previously not diabetic who became diabetic. And then in 2011 or so, or more recently than that, the HbA1c was adopted as a threshold, which again may have increased the pool of less severe diabetics. So I was just checking whether you'd used criteria to determine right back to 1986, or whether you were just using read codes.
Yeah, we used the diagnosis of diabetes
Right.
as a selection criteria, and also used the first prescription of anti-diabetic medication.
Okay, thank you.
This is a very good point. We probably need to take it into consideration in our further work. I have written it down. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jabal, once more.